Welcome in, fans, to another episode of the Two Line Pass podcast. Dustin is with us. Ryan, unfortunately, is day to day. The injury bug continues to bite the Utah Hockey Club as it continues to bite the Two Line Pass podcast. But Dustin and I have an exciting episode to talk to you about a lot of things. We're going to be all over the place. But Dustin, how are you tonight? That's where I want to start. As always, how you feeling tonight?
I'm fantastic. I feel really good. I don't want to say I wanted a break, but I probably needed an emotional break from the roller coaster of wins and losses and just constantly scoreboard watching with the teams that we're in the wild card race for. And so yeah, a nice little break here for the next like 2 weeks or so.
Nice little Four Nations break. That starts Wednesday the 12th. Tonight, the Four Nations tournament kicks off. A couple of Utah Hockey Club players represented in Jusso, Valimaki, and Olli Maatta playing for Team Finland. Clayton Keller was snubbed from the United States team, as was Nick Schmaltz, but mostly Clayton Keller. And it should be an exciting tournament, but a much-needed rest for the team, but no rest for the podcast, as we're still here breaking it down. And Dustin, we just got back, finished the last road trip before the break. After a relatively disappointing home stand, I think we can all agree, they actually performed very well on a very difficult road trip. We discussed how difficult this road trip was. We played Columbus, played Carolina, played Washington. 3 teams in the East. All 3 teams are playoff teams. Washington, the second best team in the league. Carolina, one of the best teams in the league. And we managed to take 2 out of the 3 games. A win against Columbus, a shellacking against Carolina. They get their vengeance. And then we go and we beat Washington in the shootout. It was phenomenal. I think I exceeded my expectations. Dustin, do you have any big takeaways from those 3 games and what it means to the players and to this team going into the break?
I mean, I know one of them was during the end of the homestand, but Gunther's heroics in overtime were amazing. You know, whether he was scoring with 0.3 seconds left or 3 minutes left, just incredibly impressive. I do think it did cover some warts with how, I don't want to say bad, but I guess mediocre. How mediocre Utah played in those games that he wound up winning in overtime. But going on the road and doing what they did to Washington, who let's see, they are second in the league in points, like you said, with arguably one of the, if not the greatest to ever do it. And to go in there and take a full 2 points, that was one that I believe in the episode before that, last week, I talked about how we'd probably lose that game. I had Carolina and Washington flip-flopped. I said we'd beat Carolina and lose to Washington because Washington wanted their revenge on McBain, which I love the fact that he scored. I love the fact that McBain scored in that game. Just an extra sort of F you to the crowd, haha, you guys wanted your vengeance, and I just poked one in there. So I like seeing that. But honestly, the last and final takeaway that I had from that game specifically is the dude who is second all time in goals scored, who's chasing 99, chasing the great one, chasing the GOAT, isn't taking shootout shots. One of the best scorers of all time is not taking any shootout opportunities. It blows my mind. I know you and I have talked ad nauseum. I guess not really ad nauseum because that was only our 3rd shootout, but we've talked about Coach Tarigny's choice for who he sends out there. But that one kind of stumped me a little bit. Granted, I am new to the sport, so maybe it's just the style in which he plays. Maybe he's not skilled enough with the stick and the puck, but that one kind of confused me. So
Yeah, no, I think that's a legitimate question to ask. I think a lot of fans were asking that, and kind of like we've asked. So we've had 3 shootouts. Dylan Gunther has still not taken a shootout shot. So our most prolific goal scorer, or at least he's tied with Clayton Keller now at 20 apiece, hasn't taken a shootout shot. And so I think it's the different, there's the different standard of scoring in a shootout versus just the standard game. Now, Ryan and I kind of have been criticizing Ovechkin and talking about how, I mean, he's approaching 40, so he's one of the greatest natural goal scorers of all time, obviously, but hey, Father Time catches up with all of us, and so you've seen he's kind of been an empty net merchant for a couple of his goals, which, I mean, the more this season are empty netters than not, like, you know, there's not going to be an asterisk, but I mean, it's just something to say, like, you know, I don't know. Empty net goals overall are much higher in the modern game than they were in previous years, and certainly during the Gretzky era. I'm not saying that Ovechkin is only chasing it because of empty net goals, but you're seeing him play a lot on the power play, a lot in the garbage minutes or the empty net minutes, and then not as much elsewhere, and he's certainly not a defensive powerhouse right now. And so you're looking at his minutes being kind of, they're making sure that he gets there, right? Because if he doesn't get to the record this year, he absolutely is going to play next year, and then the entirety of next season will just be get him the record. That's it. And that will be his entire purpose on the team, is just to get in the record, but he won't be playing 20 minutes, you know, that you might expect out of a top line player. So kind of interesting, but we goose egged him in regulation as well. He got one against us at home, but we kept him off the score sheet in Washington. So
and a couple of assists, so not technically off the score sheet, but
I guess
goal. We kept him out of the back.
No
of the net.
goals, right? No goals, but he did. He had 2 assists, I think. Yeah, on Dylan Strome and Tom Wilson's goal. Yeah,
and he had the assist, a beautiful assist on the extra attacker goal there to send it into overtime in the first place. Just that was a beautiful, like, just not shot on goal, but throwing it to the net that got redirected in. That's just almost impossible for Valimaki to stop, and just a beautiful play. And you can see, like, just how truly good he is at putting that, knowing to not shoot that at the net rather than just direct it in front. Just truly a phenomenal hockey player.
Absolutely. And another major thing happened in this game. It'll be a nice segue into the next segment. So I kind of want to back up a little bit before we talk about the goalie situation. But I want to go back to that Columbus game, right? This is the game that started the road trip. This is where Dylan Guenther's overtime heroics, the legend that is Dylan Don't Take My Guenthers, just continues to just grow and grow and grow. And he is just such a fantastic talent to watch. And he's quickly becoming one of the favorites here. He was always, I think, in the top for fan favorites, but now he's solidified himself with those back-to-back overtime goals, both at home and now against the Columbus Blue Jackets. But there was another thing that I was very happy with, Dustin, that you and I talked about a lot, because I'm very, very critical. I'm the mayor of Negative Town, and I was extremely critical of Lawson Krause all season. Underperformed in major ways. He gets benched before the Blue Jackets game. He comes back and plays. I thought maybe he should have sat a few more, but after sitting, he comes back and he scores the first goal, his 8th of the year. And so it was nice to see Lawson Krause get on the board. And it was funny because we tweeted, I said, okay, now do Bjugstad next. And then Bjugstad looks like he gets a goal. And it's almost like this, oh my gosh, like, what have we done? You know, I'm just going to continue to criticize them more. It turns out that it was actually Olli Maatta's goal. So his 2nd of the year, which is fantastic. And Bjugstad gets an assist. So both of those guys who have struggled trying to get back into it, and especially Lawson Krause, like Bjugstad, I think he's a free agent in the summer, so even if he doesn't do what we want him to do, like I don't suspect that he will be part of this team next year. Lawson Krause, however, I do suspect that he will be on the team next year. So getting him back into the rhythm of things, that's much more important. So it was good to see him. I still have my doubts. I still, I hope he can get better, because he was a 20-goal scorer for the past couple of seasons and not on pace at all to get there, having played all but one game with only 8 goals. It's just been a very, very disappointing season for Lawson Krause, and excited to get him back up after having been benched. I thought it was just kind of interesting. It was quick. We talked about Michelli getting back in action, who now he continues to be benched. And so what is Torigny doing there? And who knows? But Krause got back for at least that game, and then was nowhere to be seen in the next two games. But at least he had a good game against the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yeah, I think it's just, we talked about how important it is to get a handful of these guys back into their groove and back into a rhythm. And Lawson, I think, like, it would be really nice to see the Sheriff get back into his form, get him back in the. It's probably more important to get. I'm sorry, less important to get Bukestad, but it was definitely something, or I should say, someone you were expecting more from this season. I guess we should have expected maybe like for him to take a bit of a back seat with like guys like Cooley and Gunther obviously going to take steps forward, but you still want to see more.
This is absolutely true. He did play on the second line in previous years, right? So obviously reduced minutes. He's been on the third line most of the year. So that line has struggled. The Michelli, Bukestad, Kraus line, until it was broken up permanently, was one of the most underperforming lines of the year. So obviously the reduced time is going to play a factor. But then we go into the Carolina game, and this is a game that I think we would like to forget. Other than Josh Stone continuing to impress, Josh Stone gets his third goal of the year, and then it was unfortunately all Carolina in the second period. And again, the second period woes have kind of not been the story lately. I feel like it's kind of shifted more towards the third period. We always have a letdown period, but it hasn't been traditionally it hasn't been the second period recently until this game. And then it very much was Carolina Hurricanes getting 4 goals in the second period. It was not great. One of them was a shorthanded goal too. So kind of, and that was after Clayton Keller so Clayton Keller scores his 19th. He cuts the lead to 1. So it's 3-2. And then there was a penalty that, it was a kind of an iffy penalty. The Carolina fans obviously didn't like it, but then Carolina scores a shorthanded goal. So it all seemed to not matter and almost was a net positive for them getting that power play or that penalty. But Utah's power play struggled at times. Like they went 2 for 5 in this game, but then the other power plays just looked just garbage, just absolute garbage. And then an empty net goal that I disagreed with in terms of Torigny. It was 6-3. We were down by 3. He pulls the goalie, and now the situation was we were on the power play.
It was 5-3 when he pulled the goalie. The empty net goal was the empty net goal score made it 6-3, and then they scored again after that to make it 7-3.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We had a 5-on-3 power play. We score to make it 5-3. And so then on the ensuing 5-on-4, he pulls the goalie to make it a 6-on-4, and they score almost immediately after we pulled the goalie and sent the extra attacker. And I was highly critical of this decision, not because I don't philosophically think that pulling the goalie in that situation is right. It's just with the personnel group that was on the ice at the time, I did not think was the correct personnel group, considering we still had 3 minutes left in the game. Now, I understand a 6-on-4 is tantalizing, but Utah still is the only team in the NHL who does not have a goal with the extra attacker and the net empty. So even 6-on-4, it didn't make sense. I would have much rather seen the first line plus Gunther than the second power play unit, which unfortunately includes powerhouses like Lawson Krause, a tired Clayton Keller who had just played pretty much the entire power play before. So I don't know. I didn't agree with the decision overall, and it didn't matter in the end. So Carolina ends up getting the empty net, and then to make matters worse, they score again when there wasn't an empty net. So it was an unfortunate end to a unfortunate game. Any other takeaways from that game?
For the first period and a half, like that game felt okay. Like you said it was 3-2, and we go on the power play, and you're thinking, okay, like, all right, we can tie this up. We can ride some momentum. We just get through the second period, get to the third period. Let's score a power play goal here, and they get a shorthanded goal, and it just slipped away like impossibly fast. And you went from thinking, all right, we're holding our own against a top 3 team in the East, one of the better teams just in the league overall. We're holding our own, and it just in the blink of an eye was gone. You had a power play, and then just boop, before he could even send a tweet from the Two Line Pass Twitter account about we're going on a power play, they've scored shorthanded. And it seems like that happens a lot as someone who's covering and trying to like live tweet some of these games. There's been a handful of times where something good happens and I'm trying to tweet about it, and before I can even finish typing the tweet, something bad has happened. Just very, very frustrating to see, but very, very impressed with how they rebounded from it on a back-to-back.
Oh, absolutely. They could have, after that shellacking in a back-to-back against Washington, who we've already talked about was the second best team in the league, they could have absolutely phoned it in, but they came out firing. I mean, it was an exciting first period in that Washington game. So, I mean, it was great. 3 goals.
2 goals in like
Utah.
a minute 52. Scored 2 on their first 2 shots on goal. They got 2 shots on goal, and they both went in. They both found to the back of the net. Just they came out with their heads on fire, and very scary in the third period. Felt like that was going to slip away, and like crap, we went into the third with a 4-2 lead, and we're only going to get out of this with 1 point. But Nick Schmaltz, praise be to the greatest 8 of them all, saved our hides. Captain material, as we say here on the podcast. Captain material from the great number 8.
Absolutely, and he had some struggles. He has taken 3 of 3 shootout attempts. In all 3 of the shootouts the Utah has played, and Nick Schmaltz has taken a shot in all 3 of them, and he went 0 for 2. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to see Nick Schmaltz because he was not even really close in his first 2, but he puts a beauty in, and he's the only player of the 6. All 6 players got to attempt it. Clayton Keller had the opportunity to seal it, and his shot gets stopped. But Veggie proving to be the difference maker in the shootout there, along with Schmaltz. And speaking of Veggie, the big story in that game, Connor Ingram goes out. He takes a slap shot from none other than Alexander Ovechkin directly in the mask. He's clearly shaken up. He leaves the ice and does not return. Veggie comes in relief and just plays phenomenal, lets a few in, but overall, just absolutely, I think he had something like, even in relief, 30 saves. So just an absolute, yeah. So Valimaki had 30 saves in relief, guys, in relief. He came in the second period and still takes 30, or gets 30 saves, or it was maybe it was right at the end of the first period.
Yeah, he saved 30 of 32. So save percentage of 93.8.
Yeah, so absolutely fantastic for Veggie, and then to go into the shootout and be the standout there, and just great.
But yeah, on a back-to-back, going in cold after Ingram gets pulled off the ice, and like the bright side of, I shouldn't say a bright side of Connor Ingram being injured, but the fact that he did leave the game injured instead of being pulled. They talked about that on the broadcast, that if your goalie leaves injured instead of you just pulling him, the backup gets to go out there and go through a warm-up. So I'm sure that was extremely helpful for Valimaki to go out there and actually like carve out his crease and get his legs stretched out and get a warm-up in and get loose. But yeah, going in there on a back-to-back, cold off the bench when you're not expecting to play, and go out there and turn in one of your better performances, save darn near 94% of the shots that you face, and like you said, a perfect 3 for 3 against the second best team in the NHL to secure a win was mighty, mighty impressive.
And they say that goalies more than anybody have to have a short memory and get over a loss. And Valimaki was in net in Carolina, who had that shellacking. So he could have, obviously, we've criticized this team in the past about maybe mentally not being there and not being able to get back up, for lack of a better word, being soft. And Valimaki proved that he is anything but soft, and is one of those goalies that just, this increases our argument that we're making all season, that on the tail end of a back-to-back, he comes in and performs better the second time. He is a goalie that absolutely benefits from a rhythm, and he absolutely does not benefit from the back and forth. So, again, I don't want Ingram to be injured. I want Ingram to be successful. But if his injury allows Valimaki to continue to get starts, I am okay with that. If Tarigny's hand has to be 4. I am okay with that because we have been not shy at all about our disagreement with how he's handled the goalies, and I don't think there's any reasonable fan who can say, yeah, no, it's really making sense. Like, I really like this back and forth. That's the modern approach to goaltending, and that's how it should be forever. Because, well, thank goodness they're both really good, because that means they can just be fresh and rested. Nobody's saying that, and if you are, don't say that publicly. Say it mockingly, but don't say it publicly and seriously. Now, Dustin, I made a tweet that Carolina game was likely the last time that we saw Veggie in net for the Utah Hockey Club, because I felt like he was the highest of highs in terms of stock, and if we were going to make a move at the deadline and we were going to make a trade, it was going to be sending Veggie away. Now with Ingram, I don't know if we do that. I think we may keep him, which is good, unless Tarigny keeps doing this back and forth. Ingram's injury is day to day, but let's segue this into the trade deadline. As we've talked about before, the Four Nations tournament is going to be like a de facto trade deadline. Even though the actual trade deadline isn't until March, the Four Nations tournament is going to be where the GMs are talking, and there's a lot of talk about how players who are even playing in the Four Nations tournament may not return to the team that they were on before the tournament. We had Veggie as a potential trade target before the injury to Ingram. Even if it's day to day, what's your feeling as a fan? Do you think Veggie stays, or do you think he's still potentially a hot enough commodity that they'll entertain offers regardless?
Like I've said before, I was a little worried that this team would treat some players coming back from injury like Dursey and now like Cooley, treat those as additions, like trading for somebody, as opposed to actually going and making a trade. So I think ideally, as much as it pains me as a Valimaki fan to say it, because he is a free agent in this upcoming offseason, you need to have conversations about, do you want to come back here? What price tag are we looking at? Because we're probably not going to be able to pay you and Ingram and some of the guys that we're going to have to pay here in the next couple of years. So the front office needs to figure out if Valimaki is the future of this program, of this team, and whether they're going to bring him back. And if he says he doesn't want to come back, or he's demanding too much money and it's just not going to work out, you should probably try to take him and bundle him with somebody like a Lawson Krause, somebody, or a Bukestad, and try to turn him into help on the offensive side of the ice, to bring in some extra firepower, somebody else who can score goals to help out that top line. And that might be the best way to go about it, because you don't want to lose a goaltender like Valimaki in the offseason for nothing and just watch him walk away and sign with another team, especially another team in the same division or anything like that. I don't know who, I haven't gone through and actually looked at who might be searching for goalies in this offseason, but there are teams out there, like perhaps Edmonton, although you probably don't want to trade him to Edmonton, who are looking for goalie help, who have a lot of good offensive pieces, who you could package Valimaki and someone else to try and bring in some offensive firepower. So that's probably the correct way to handle it if you're working in the front office of the hockey club. As much as I would hate it as a fan, that's probably the way it should be handled.
Absolutely. And one thing to consider is Valimaki, with the way he's playing, he makes $2.7 million a year now, but there's every reason to believe that he and his agent would be seeking a slight pay raise. And it's up to the GMs of the world to determine how much he is worth, because I don't think he's one of those goalies who's going to get your $6 million plus for 6 years. You saw a lot of that contract dispute in Jeremy Swayman and Igor Shesterkin. Obviously, he's nowhere near Shesterkin, but Jeremy Swayman, Linus Ullmark, and those kind of guys that are they're all seeking these 6 to 8 million a year deals, and I don't think Veggie's there yet. I don't know if he'll ever get to the point where he's a 6 to 8 million dollar goalie, and I would really like to keep him at 3 million or below. And so if he wants more than 3 million, as much as I love Veggie, am I willing to pay Veggie more than 3 million? I'm not sure that I am, and I'm not sure that this team is, if they plan on still keeping their kind of this 50-50 rotation that they've got going. I think they would really like to keep the total goalie's salary under 5 million, which it is right now. Connor Ingram only at 1. Well, he's at 2 million, just below.
I was going to say he's 1.95, so basically 2.
Yeah, so for both goalies, you're under 5 million. And neither of those goalies alone is worth that. They're not 5 million a year goalies. So I would really, if you can't just let Veggie walk, you absolutely in no way, shape, or form can let Veggie walk. So if you're not going to re-sign him, you have to trade him. If they keep him, that to me says they are going to re-sign him, because there's just no way with his stock as hot as it is that you can't get at least a draft pick for him. Right? Like, there is no way on this earth that you don't get something out of him if you don't re-sign him. So we'll see what they do with that goalie. So speaking of the larger, in terms of whether or not Utah is a buyer or whether or not Utah is a seller, we obviously have to look at the big question. Will the Utah Hockey Club make the playoffs? We're looking at the schedule. We're seeing what comes next. We obviously are. I'm sticking with my prediction that 93 points is the minimum you need, and I think 93 will get in. There's 26 games left. 26 games left. Utah needs to win 18 of them to get to the 93 point mark, assuming there's no overtime losses. Dustin, point blank, before we talk about buying and selling, does the Utah Hockey Club make the playoffs this year?
Probably say I'd give it like a 70-30 split. Like 70% we're probably not making the playoffs. 30% we do. But I can tell you one thing, we will know at about 9 p.m. Sunday, March 16th, whether or not Utah is making the playoffs. That will be guaranteed, set in stone. We will know if we're making the playoffs or not, because in between then, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games. So that'll be our 11th game after the Four Nations break. And that is a game on the road at Vancouver, we are currently chasing for that second wildcard spot. And there are some winnable games in that stretch. I'm not going to go too far into it. We'll do that next week. But there are some winnable games in that stretch. But in that stretch, we play Vancouver twice. So if we lose a couple of games that we shouldn't in there, and we lose those 2 games to Vancouver, we are 100% not making the playoffs. But we will know by that time, March 16th at about 9 p.m., we'll know whether or not we're making the playoffs.
And unfortunately, that is 2 weeks too late to determine. The free agency is over. March 4th is the trade deadline, so that is too late. But I'm right there with you. I'm a little less. I think it's probably closer to 90-10. The pessimist in me, of course, says we're already out of it. But I've looked at the last 26 games, and I got us winning 14 of them at best. We do go to overtime quite a bit. So is there 8 overtime losses in there to make up for those 4 losses? I don't know. I don't know that there is 8 overtime losses in there, considering I'm assuming we win at least half of our overtime games.
We love going to overtime. But we do have 3 games down the home stretch against the 2 teams that are in front of us. And those are 3 games that are essentially must-win games. You have to win the 2 against Vancouver and the 1 against Calgary. or else you're not making the playoffs. You can't lose essentially 4 points worth of ground in each of those games. Like you have to. You have to gain 2 instead of falling back 2. Like that's such a huge head-to-head difference that you have to win those games more than any others. You got to win a lot, but those 3 games you have to win.
And there's the thought, you hear it a lot in sports, about controlling your own destiny. And I think Utah, unfortunately, is a team that does not control their destiny. It's not a win and you're in situation. Utah needs to win, and they need help from both Vancouver and Calgary. And just taking the points off them is still not enough to quite make up that gap. But you're absolutely right. We cannot lose either of those games, those 3 games. Absolutely not. 100% not. But we also have to be better than them, and they have to stumble. Now, Vancouver's a team that's been hot and cold all season. They are currently riding a hot streak. Calgary has been just kind of this slow and steady wins the race type team. Not nearly as streaky, I think, as Utah or Vancouver. But yeah, Utah, unfortunately, we don't control our own destiny. We have to continue to win, and we need Vancouver and Calgary to take a step back as well. And we're just talking about that final.
That there is a chance that, like, right after 4 Nations, Utah could be very, very close to controlling their own destiny. Vancouver comes out of this break. They go on the road to Vegas, Utah, and Los Angeles. Those are 3 tough games. And if Utah wins that, like, if Calgary comes out of this break and they go loss, and they don't pull away at all, because I believe we're 6 points back of them right now. And then Utah comes out and they play Los Angeles, Vancouver, and Chicago. And I mean, hopefully we can beat Chicago at home. Chicago's one of the worst teams in the NHL. So hopefully we can beat Chicago at home. And if Utah comes out, even if they lose to the Kings in Los Angeles, if they come out and they beat Vancouver, they beat Chicago, and they cut that lead down to just 2 points, that's really close to being able to control your own destiny. So if things go as well as they could, just immediately out of the gate after 4 Nations, Utah's could be very, very close to controlling their own destiny.
Yeah. I would like the team to treat it to be as if we're going to make the playoffs in terms of free agency, bringing this full circle to free agency. Like, I know we both think that it's more likely than not that they won't make the playoffs, but I'll tell you, I think it's more likely than not too that regardless, that Utah does nothing at the trade deadline, that they aren't movers or they aren't sellers and they aren't buyers. I think that is a very likely scenario. But Dustin, there is, if they are buyers, I want them to get into playoff mode, because I've got a suggestion for them, and that is Ryan Donato from the Chicago Blackhawks. He is a center for $2 million a year. He's having one of the best years of his career, and I think he could absolutely solidify that center position for the Utah Hockey Club as they go down the stretch. Now, we're assuming Cooley comes back. So to make this Donato trade work, a lot of things need to happen, because we need to make some roster spots, right? Cooley goes to the first line. Here's how I'd break it down, right? So you've got Keller, Cooley, Schmaltz on line 1. Then you'd move Jack McBain back to the left wing. He plays center or counter to Gunther, which he did most of the beginning of the season when Logan Cooley was on that second line. So you've got Jack McBain, Barrett Hayton, Dylan Gunther as our second line. Then you've got Matthias Michelli, Ryan Donato, Josh Doan as our third line. Then I've moved Michael Carcone and Alex Kerfoot back to the fourth line. So you've got Carcone, Stenlund, and Kerfoot as our fourth line. Now, the problem is that leaves you with Liam O'Brien, Lawson Krause, and Nick Bjugstad that you have to do something with, because you have too many contracts. So you have to move somebody. We can maybe send Nick DeSimone back on waivers, because Sean Dursey's going to come back. Now you have Jusso Valimaki as the only defenseman, but you can only keep one of those 2. You got to send one of them. You can only have one extra defenseman, because Robert Bortuzzo's coming back too. He's off of injured reserve. So, big things. I don't know, honestly, who Chicago would take other than, unfortunately, Karel Vejmelka. I think Chicago would love to have Karel Vejmelka, and I love to have him where they can sign him long-term in Chicago, and they might pay him. Peter Mrazek is aging, and he has had a very down year. Arvid Soderblom from Chicago he's a little younger than Vejmelka, but he's not as good as Vejmelka, so I don't know if he's their future. So they could absolutely be looking at a guy like Vejmelka, and we get Ryan Donato, who I do not think he plays long term into this team, but in terms of making the playoff push, I think he is the most likely candidate. The only other option is some long shot wingers that I don't think we're going to get. Obviously, we're going to go after the wingers and centers in free agency, but we're not going to get them for the playoff push. But Ryan Donato, that would be my go-to, go get him free agency, and I hope they do, because that to me says fight for a playoff spot one way or another, and there's little to no downside because he's a free agent at the end of the year anyway. He's only $2 million a year, like little downside if you can make it work. But Dustin,
yeah, and he's somebody that I think Chicago would probably be willing to let go. He hasn't been there a long time. He's been he's been a career journeyman in the NHL. He's been with, let's see, 5 different teams in the NHL. He hasn't stayed with any of them for more than 2 years. So he's bounced around, and that's who he is. And he's good enough, especially this year. He's already through 53 games. He has 7 more. You add Cooley back into this lineup. You add Dursey back into this lineup. And then if you can add somebody who can add offense like Ryan Donato, I think that's enough to get this team into the playoffs. Especially, like I said, if those first 3 games out of the gate after Four Nations go well, and then they make that trade, maybe the front office sits back. They're like, okay, let's see how these 3 go. Let's see where we sit behind Vancouver in terms of points after these 3 games. Because if Vancouver comes out and they beat the Kings, they beat Vegas, they beat Utah, and Utah goes winless in those first 3, and that lead balloons from 6 points up to 12 points, maybe Utah just sits on their hands and says, all right, we're not going to sell because we've got a lot of young talent here. We're the second youngest team in the NHL. We're not going to give up any of our pieces, so we're not going to become sellers. As fans in Utah are accustomed to, just a front office in Utah who does nothing at the deadline and just says, we're just going to stand pat. We're going to stay here. Whether we make the playoffs or not, we're going to try to get there. Obviously, if we don't, it's okay. We still have a lot of talent. We'll get them next year. But if the things go well after these first 3 games, I could see him pulling the trigger on a trade like that.
I hope so. The Utah Jazz have splashed around in their free agency, or I say free agency, but at their trade deadline. So hopefully Utah makes some moves. But before we close up, Dustin, I want to throw something out there, because whether we're buyers or sellers, the Utah Hockey Club has a decision to make. Unfortunately, Vladislav Kolyachonok is no longer with the team. He was sent on waivers and picked up with Pittsburgh. Right? We had one too many defensemen on the team. However, we may still have one too many defensemen on the team. With Logan Cooley coming back in the lineup, Sean Dursey coming back in the lineup. This is, of course, assuming Cooley comes back after Four Nations, but you've got Robert Bortuzzo, who's also getting healthy, Sean Dursey, who's getting healthy. Josh Stone was sent down to the AHL. Everybody assumes that this was just a conditioning assignment, that this was just to keep him getting playing time while the break was happening, right? That this would be beneficial for him. However, with everybody coming back, Dustin, the roster count is 25 out of 23. Cuts have to be made somewhere, right? So I'm wondering who's going to go. Nick DeSimone, I don't think they're going to send. I think the team has loved where he's at. They've loved the way he's played. So maybe Robert Bortuzzo gets sent. But then you still have to cut or send down one more player. And I think you have to have a backup defenseman. So I'm worried that Jusso Valimaki is done for and will not make it back to the Utah Hockey Club at the end of the Four Nations tournament. He's playing for Team Finland. He's very talented. He's 26 years old, but has, in the minds of Torigny and the front office, has underperformed. I think they're looking for these high-powered offensive defensemen, and he just hasn't done it. He just hasn't done it. Only 5 points through 43 games played. And so hopefully if they make that decision, they send him away and get something back for him, and don't just let somebody claim him off of waivers like Koleachonok did. I thought they could have at least got a 4th-round draft pick for Koleachonok. That's better than nothing, but what do I know? But somebody's got to go, Dustin. Somebody's got to go. Who do you think it might be?
I think you might be right. I mean, logically, you picked up Nick DeSimone off of waivers. He's probably the easiest to just to send back. Say like, all right, we brought you in to kind of fill some shoes while Jersey was out. You filled in admirably. We've been really impressed. We really liked it, but you're not part of the future of this club, so you'd think that would be the easiest one. But he's played really well. I mean, they talk constantly on the broadcast about how much the team likes him, about how impressed.
Fortunately, may be the case. If you're a front office, listening to this podcast, let me tell you how good Lawson Crouse has been for this team. I mean, probably the most important winger that we have. Such good value in that he is a steal at $4.3 million. Are you kidding me? He should probably be making $8 million. He is so good. I mean, I would be crushed if Lawson Crouse got traded. If there was a front office that wanted him, don't you dare take my Lawson Crouse. He is so near and dear to my heart. And you know what? While we're at it, don't take Bukestad either. He's too good. And he'll probably make you win too much. So you don't want him either. Just keep that in mind. But Dustin, I wanted to rant about Torigny. I won't have time for it. Do we have any closing thoughts before we end the cast tonight?
I almost bought that sales pitch. It was really good. I can tell you've been working on it. Like maybe you've got some friends or family that work on used car lots. So it was almost believable. I commend you.
I pat Lawson Crouse. This bad boy can fit so many 4th-round draft picks in him. Hey, thanks so much for listening, guys. We appreciate you. Dustin, thanks for coming on with me tonight. Ryan, I hope you get feeling better. And as always, guys, go Utah Hockey Club. Thanks for listening, and have yourself a great night.